So to work with right angle trigonometry, let's quickly talk about the right angle triangle, as that's a fundamental of all the triangles, actually, all shapes. So this is how a right angle triangle looks like. It has one angle here which is 90 degrees, right? It has a long diagonal side. This one is called the hypotenuse. And we have the so-called opposite. And the adjacent. How do we know which side is the opposite and which is the adjacent? Well, I'll talk about that later, but for now, just notice how there is an angle defined here. Okay? Notice how there's an angle given there. So, now that we know the sides hypotenuse, opposite and adjacent, we can take a look into sine, cosine, and tangent. In short, sin, cos, tan. By using these trigonometric functions, we are able to find out actually any of these sides and any of these angles, which is quite cool. In this video, we're going to talk about right angle trigonometry, more specifically the use of sine, cosine, and tangent. So how do we use these functions, these trigonometric functions? Well, first you need to choose one, right? And how do we choose one? Well, it depends on the circumstance. Which side is given with the value in length? Which angle do you want? And etc. So to find that out, it is worth noting down this expression or something, which is called so ka toa. It might sound funny, but it is actually very helpful. So SOH stands for sin equals opposite, so this side here, over the hypotenuse, which is the diagonal side. CAH stands for cosine, is equal to adjacent over hypotenuse. TOA stands for tangent, equals opposite over hypotenuse. All right? So with this now, we can solve some examples. We have this side with the value of x, which we don't know, right? And we have this hypotenuse with value 50 centimeters, and we have this angle with 30 degrees. Now we want to find x, so how do we do that? First, let's define what sides we have. First, we see that we have the hypotenuse here. And then we have the side given, which is x, right? It is given with the value x. This is the adjacent. And this one is opposite. So again, how do we know which one is the opposite and which one is the adjacent? Well, the opposite side is always the opposite of the angle given. So in this case, this angle is given of 30 degrees. So this is the opposite. It's always the opposite of this angle. Okay? We can go into a little deeper why, and own stuff, but that's a topic for another video that's coming shortly. So now that we know these, we can proceed. How do we find x? We have the hypotenuse given and the adjacent given. Or we want the adjacent, but it's given to be x, right? Hypotenuse and adjacent. If you look at the SOHCAHTOA, we see that the hypotenuse and the adjacent is this CAH or CA, which is cosine, right? So we use the cosine function. So what you need to do is to write down cosine or cos 30, because it's 30 degrees, right? Is equal to, remember CAH, the adjacent, which is x, and the hypotenuse, which is 50. Now to find x, we need to rearrange a little bit, so it will become x equals cos 30 times 50, which will give you about 28.87 centimeters. All right, so that's x. Now, if you didn't get this answer, make sure that your calculator settings has the angle set to degrees and not radians or gradients. If they are, you're most likely incorrect with your answer. But how do we find an angle? You can see that here is the angle of theta, and we have two values set. Again, let's identify the sides. We have the hypotenuse here. We have the opposite here. Again, opposite because it is the opposite to the angle given. And this is the adjacent. Okay. So how do we proceed? Well, we have the hypotenuse given and the opposite given. So let's take a look. SOHCAHTOA. Opposite hypotenuse. SOH. Opposite hypotenuse. So we use the sine function. But since we want to find the angle, we need to use inverse sine. So that's sine to the power of -1. And in your calculator, you write sine to the power of -1. Then you write, remember, so the opposite, which is 20 centimeters, divided by the hypotenuse, which is 40. And if you hit execute, you will get 30 degrees. Again, if you didn't get this answer, check your degree mode and make sure it is in degrees and not radians. Angle mode, sorry. So that's how you find an angle. And if you have this given, for instance, here, this adjacent, then you will need to use another function and not the sine. You get the deal, right? If you have any questions about this, please check out our website, MezeiMaths.com, link in the description. And if you have any further questions, reach out at r/MezeiMaths on Reddit. Thank you for watching.